Welcome back to Realism Overhaul. Today we're going to be trying to put a satellite in orbit. But first, before we're able to do that, there's a few things in the way that are going to take several hundred days, and that is upgrading the launch pad as well as build times. And all this is sort of on a time crunch because of the contract we have. Cost of failing it is pretty much all the money I have, and only got about like 500 days. So while that's going on, the upgrades are going on. In the meantime, we have some more sounding rocket contracts that SPIRO 6 can do no problem. So we're going to kick it off with just a few more before we start trying to launch a satellite into orbit on the 18th of January 1953. One of the main engines on the SPIRO 6 actually failed, which caused us to only reach a max altitude of 47,329 meters. And by the way, there is a chart, a Google spreadsheet in the description that has all the information on all of the launches. So I'm not going to go over all of it in the video, just sort of the basics, just so we know, this is what happened in the mission. If you really want to look at all the information that I've documented about each launch, check the description below and go check out that spreadsheet. There's a list of everything. I'm trying to make it a little bit more organized. Our second launch for SPIRO 6 on March 1st, 1953 was a success, reached 303,259 meters. The next launch was on April 12th, 1953. And one of the main engines also had a performance drop, but the mission was able to reach the correct altitude for the contract. Despite this, these Airbs aren't the most reliable, but we do have a pretty good success rate with them. On the 26th of May 1953, we had our 17th launch of the program, I believe the 16th SPIRO launch, and this completed its mission progressively with more and more weight in the payload section. This one had 217.7 units of payload. These contracts are pretty much just giving me more and more weight to take to a certain altitude, 100 kilometers, and at the same time fulfilling altitude contracts up to this point. But with the more and more weight on SPIRO 6, we're unable to do the altitude contracts at this point and only do the payload contracts. And there was one more contract at 100 kilometers, and that was to take almost 300 units of payload to 100 kilometers. On the 14th of July 1953, we completed that contract no problem. After that launch, the contracts changed for sounding rockets, and instead of taking this amount, progressively higher amount of payload to 100 kilometers, they started over at 300 kilometers to take a small amount to 300 kilometers. And the 9th of August 1953, SPIRO 6 tried this out, but the rocket flipped and went horizontal. I tried to range safety, but a staging event happened before range safety happened, so part of the rocket landed right outside of a building. It's assumed to be either a school or a warehouse, but luckily no one was injured. It was just some property damage, just some scared citizens. The press was on our butts. Our marketing team took care of it. It's fine. But the reason that it went horizontal, reminiscent of the first episode, was after taking away all of the weight from the almost 300 payload and switching that down to like 44 units of payload, the center of lift was above the center of mass. And I didn't take a look at that. I just assumed it'd be fine. And that's what caused it to flip over. But all I had to do was make the wings longer on the bottom, the fins, sorry. And the 5th of September 1953, our final SPIRO 6 to this date launch was completely successful, reaching an altitude of 319,284 meters. While these SPIRO 6 launches were underway, I was trying to design something that could make into orbit. And I tried 3 different designs. The first one, I was just kind of messing around and seeing how many Airbs I could fit on this SPIRO rocket. And, well, I mean, take a look. These designs definitely didn't work. They were not aerodynamic at all. I was probably very tired while doing this. But it was clear that having just aerobees to make it into orbit would not work. The only other engine I had is the RD-100, and at this point I could upgrade it to the RD-101, which gave us a burn time of 125 meters per second with a lot more thrust than the aerobees had. And I designed one design which I didn't end up liking, and then I switched over to another design. The first design had multiple fuel tanks as the first stage, and the second design was much more streamlined and more aerodynamic and more stable because of less staging events. It was overall better. But after building these, there was a few things that were in our way from being able to actually launch this rocket. The first of which would be sort of obvious, is our launch pad, which was still level 1 at the time. Upgrading to level 2 takes 100 or so days, and gives us a 60-ton weight limit. Unfortunately, this rocket weighs way over 60 tons. But it just so happens that if we send this first tank out dry, not fueled, empty, the rocket weighs a little bit under 60 tons. So I could just fuel it up on the launch pad before sending it up. And I tested this in simulations. It did in fact work. So that gets us past the weight problem. The second problem that's in our way is how long it takes to build. We have a contract that's due in about 500 or so days, where if we fail it, the cost for failing it is pretty much all the money we have. So having more than one shot at this is pretty important. So what I had to do is use some upgrade points and buy some upgrade points, which costed a lot of money, in order to make sure that we have at least 2 launches of this rocket before the contract is up. And the first of which happened to be on April 1st, 1954. I did not look at the date until post. I didn't notice that it was the 1st of April while launching this. Had I noticed it, I probably would have skipped ahead one day. Because it's sort of like, it's almost like a joke. It's almost like it was laughing at me, like, ha, you think you can make a rocket that works the first try? April Fools! Well, anyways, this first launch on April 1st, 1954, I will have live footage of. So here we go. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, main ignition start. 1. And we have liftoff. As we start tilting over here, make sure we stay in good heading. Oh, we have an engine failure. We do have an engine failure right away. This may not go so well, but luckily the gimbals are keeping us under control. Engine number 4 has lost thrust. So we're gonna have to really struggle here. Which means all these engines are gonna be burning longer than their burn rates. Oh boy. Luckily, we're keeping this under control, even with the engine failure. There is a little bit of leeway for the engines to still work. There's a little bit of leeway. However, this is going to make separation here even more risky. That 75% success rate was spot on so far. Engine cut off. No more failures. Come on, come on. Perfect. Our next stage ignited. Some explosive separation, but we are lit. Waiting for avionics. All right, avionics is under control. Perfect. All right. Despite the engine failure, some loss to that. So far, we're looking good. All right, SPIRO 7 in the air. So far, so good. We're going to jettison the bottom half of the fairing and wait for us to get a little bit more out of the atmosphere to jettison the top, just to make sure that we don't hit ourselves with the fairing and cause any unwanted explosions. We have separation of the second stage, and now it's all up to these 5 Aerobs to push us a little bit farther. And we do have the helium. You'll notice from construction, I actually have angled those RCS ports. And that was because having them straight out didn't give us enough control. And also having them angled will actually help us a little bit too, because it will push us towards our prograde vector whenever they fire, such as right now. And what I've been noticing is every time the Aerobs cut off, they actually have a little bit of yaw pitch that the RCS needs to control. But after arresting that, we spin the final stage, which we had too much solid fuel in there. It span a little bit too much, but it still kept us perfectly straight here. And this stage just barely doesn't make it, 139 kilometers. We have a next launch window on the 26th of October, 1954, and we'll also have live coverage of this launch. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, main ignition starts, 1, and we have liftoff. First stage is nominal so far. On the 26th of October, 1954, SPIRO once again reaching for the stars, hopefully for the first time, to never return to Earth. Oh man, for some reason this is harder to fly not in the simulation. Maybe it's just the stress of knowing this is a real rocket. It very well could be. Oh boy, we're almost losing it there. Luckily the gimbal authority is quite high, so we're able to still control this. Much better than the first launch where one of these engines was at, I think, a half thrust. That was dicey. Okay, so far all 4 of these engines have worked nominally. Bring us down to about a 45-degree pitch, maybe a little bit higher. Alright, I believe we are out of max Q, unless we're in it right now. But I think we have just passed max Q. We gotta keep it steady. A few more seconds. First engine cut off. We have separation. Ignition of the second stage. Come on, come on, come on! No! Come on! Arrest the movement! We have no avionics still. Avionics, come on! No! No, this is very bad. This is very, very bad. I think that wasted way too much time. Oh man. Oh, that was not good. Not putting fins on the second stage really costed me there. Well, yeah, I sure said it. Not putting fins on that second stage did in fact cost me. I know it seems kind of dumb not to have the fins on the second stage, considering that separation happens in the atmosphere. But the reason it wasn't on there is because I was worried that the fins would have too much weight. And if I had just a little bit more weight, we wouldn't have been able to make it into orbit on this run. On any of the runs. And that's what my concern was. Unfortunately, that concern caused a different problem of the second stage flipping, and watching in post, I almost think it was because I was using the stock SAS instead of the MechJeb SAS, and that may have caused an issue with the avionics, because MechJeb SAS is persistent through avionics disabling itself, and It might be a workaround. It almost feels a little bit cheaty though, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be using that, but it is what saved us in the first launch. I can confirm that much. So this, unfortunately, if I can look at the data here, only got an periapsis of negative 93 kilometers. And what I did to fix the problem was, well, I put fins on it. And I was concerned at first because it did lower our delta V by about 7 meters per second. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but that 7 meters per second at the end is what will make us get into orbit or not. And what I ended up deciding was these solid rocket boosters. I could lower their fuel and we actually gained delta V. So now we have fins on the second stage and we have more delta V for the rocket itself. So on the 24th of February 1955, SPIRO 7 will take off for a third time. Hopefully this time we're gonna make it into orbit. And wait for it, 153 kilometers of the periapsis. This completes our contract by a measly 3 kilometers. And also, this launch happened to be 5 days before the contract expired. So our program was saved by 5 days and 3 kilometers. That's the very slim margin I had for this launch to work. And also, luckily, this isn't just going to be completing a contract. We also have plenty of biomes to traverse over in space and grab telemetry analysis for, which is what we were doing here. This, in theory, will orbit Earth indefinitely. However, we won't have communications with it forever. The electric charge is definitely draining. But this would be our first, technically second satellite. The first one was technically suborbital though, from the mechanics. It was a 1 kilometer suborbital. So this is technically the first official stable low Earth orbit satellite. And we can see here the trajectory based on the surface of the Earth non-moving. But if anyone was watching this, was watching me play live on Twitch, they'll know that the third SPIRO launch didn't exactly work on the first try. And hear me out here. I did try that launch and quick save, quick load several times. And the reason for that is if I didn't successfully complete that mission, if that mission failed, like it's just over. Like that boom, the series ends right there. So for the sake of continuing this series on episode 3, I quick saved and quick loaded. And you can see by all the bloopers here, as do everything that went wrong. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and peace out.